Hey, good morning, good day, good evening to all of you. Thank you so very much for joining us today for this webinar. Before jumping into the discussion, just some information. This event is being recorded, so if you do have to leave early or would like to rewatch any of the sections, the recording will be made available to everybody that registered. The webinar will take 1 hour and we're going to do our very best to stick to time. You should also be able to submit your questions to speakers throughout the webinar at any time via the Q&A box that you can find at the bottom of your screen. And we will pick up on your questions during the Q&A after the panel discussion. Finally, we will be sending out a survey following the webinar together with the recording, and we'd hugely appreciate it if you could fill it in so that we can improve our future sessions. Now to the fun part. To those of you who do not know me, my name is Felix Feider. I'm a program officer and the freshwater lead here at Synchronicity Earth. Synchronicity Earth is a conservation funder based in London, and we focus on overlooked and underfunded conservation challenges, of which one is freshwater biodiversity. I know some of you are very familiar with the freshwater biodiversity crisis, and to others, this might be a little bit newer. We're therefore very lucky to have some of the freshwater program partners who you will hear from soon, and our freshwater advisor, Dr. Ian Harrison, with us today to give us an overview of the state of the freshwater biodiversity crisis and emerging trends and solutions. Ian, we'll start with you. Ian is the freshwater specialist for Conservation International's Moore Center for Science, where he's helping to develop their freshwater science strategy, as well as the institutional-wide freshwater initiative. He has served as the technical officer for the IUCN Freshwater Fish Specialist Group, as part of the Species Survival Commission Steering Committee, and co-chairs the IUCN Freshwater Conservation Committee. He serves on the advisory boards of both Synchronicity Earth and Shoal, and is on the grant review board of the Mohammed bin Zayed Species Conservation Fund. He's an adjunct professor for the School of Earth and Sustainability at Northern Arizona University, and is currently based in Flagstaff, Arizona. Thank you very much for joining us, Ian, so early on in your day. The floor is all yours once we have your presentation up. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Felix. Thanks. So I'm going to give you a quick introduction to some of the overarching aspects of freshwater ecosystems that we need to think about when we want to sustainably manage and conserve them, so that we have them in good ecological health, and so they supply us with the natural benefits that we rely on. And some of you may already know much of this, so I'm going to blast through it quite quickly. And first off, well, there's not much fresh water on Earth. Only about 2.5% of all the water on Earth is fresh water. The rest is seawater, or it's inland salty water. And of that 2.5%, that's the pie chart on the right that you see there. Most is ice and groundwater. Only about 0.3% of that occurs as surface water in lakes and rivers and swamps and other wetlands. That's the extracted kind of bit of the pie sticking out to the lower right. And most of it is in lakes. It's the dark green part of that kind of extracted part. So we're talking about less than 0.01% of the Earth's water that's fresh water, and it's covering less than 1% of the Earth's surface. And despite this incredible spatial diversity of freshwater ecosystems, they're packed with species diversity. According to IUCN, there's over 140,000 described species that rely on freshwater habitats for their survival. So that's around 10% or so of all known species. And it's actually likely to be much more than that, because this doesn't take into account the large numbers of undescribed species, of which there can be very many in the cases of things like algae or fungi or invertebrates. Can you go to the next slide, please? So these freshwater ecosystems provide a variety of essential natural benefits as ecosystem services to us. And so in this schematic, you can see the water's necessary for agriculture, the fields on the right, for industry, for For domestic use, hydropower, you can see a dam up in the upper left, transport with the ship on the river, cultural and recreational values up into pristine areas such as the lakes and streams that are up in the mountains. And we have important ecological regulatory services in rivers and marshes for things like nutrient filtration, carbon sequestration, water flow control, and so on. And these ensure that these systems are ecologically healthy. And these services are important for supporting livelihoods and regional economies to the estimated value of $4 trillion a year. So next slide. And relative to many other ecosystems, they're disproportionately economically very important. As you can see in this graph, the inland and coastal wetlands are boxed in red in the graph of economic value. And these high values are remarkable given these systems cover such a small part of the Earth's surface. Okay, next slide. And of course, a large part of this value is generated through the ecological functions of the freshwaters, the control over water quality and quantity and the flow, and the biodiversity, which we know to be rich, as I've mentioned, is what keeps these systems self-sustaining. Next slide. However, about a third of inland waters, inland wetlands, have experienced declines from 1970 to 2015. That's a rate more than 3 times greater than forest decline. The Freshwater Living Planet Index shows that monitored populations of vertebrates have declined by an average of 83%. And the IUCN Red List assessment for a broader range of species beyond vertebrates show that 20% of the about 42,000 assessed freshwater species are threatened with extinction, and another 18% are data deficient, so they could also be threatened. Next slide. So this obviously isn't very encouraging, and we are facing a biodiversity crisis, but that I think certainly doesn't mean that we should give up hope. In fact, I would say quite the reverse. We have some very strong opportunities for ensuring that freshwater ecosystems are better included in global policy decisions, things like the Sharm el-Sheikh implementation plan, the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, Wuhan Declaration for the Ramsar Convention. And in March of this year, we had the UN Water Conference, which included the ability for countries to make commitments to the Water Action Agenda to support sustainable development goals. And also the next slide. The Water Conference, the Freshwater Challenge was launched, which is a country-led initiative that aspires to support restoration of 300,000 kilometers of rivers and 350 million hectares of inland waters by 2030. So this is an ambitious agenda, but it's important for support for the global policy. And I would say that the success of these types of actions is based on implementation. The implementation of programs that are applied at the local scale, at the watershed scale, that are tuned to specific ecological and community needs of those places. So in closing, I would say that it's my strong belief that the work that's done by IUCN and its member organizations that I'm a part of can help promote these watershed scale actions and country action plans that really create change locally and nationally. And I think you're about to hear some excellent examples of how that's done from my co-panelists. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Ian, for that insightful presentation, for highlighting the importance of freshwater ecosystems, and for the message of hope at the end there as well. If people within the audience have any questions to Ian, please remember to add them to the Q&A box so that we can pick up on those later in the Q&A section. As you highlighted, Ian, freshwater ecosystems host some of the most diverse and productive habitats on Earth, but they're also amongst the most threatened. And the communities and biodiversity that are most impacted by their rapid loss and degradation are not yet receiving the attention or support they need to avoid further declines. Although funding and attention is increasing, it's not where it needs to be quite yet. Synchronicity Earth's freshwater program is trying to contribute to changing this. It's based on 10 years of institutional knowledge gained from funding, engaging with, and researching freshwater conservation, as well as working with a network of wonderful and amazing scientific and grassroots advisors and partners. Our approach is to identify conservation funding and action to complement existing work and to support initiatives where long-term partnership can achieve lasting and transformative change. And to achieve this, our program consists of 3 overlapping and complementary funding streams of work: catalyzing conservation action for freshwater species, supporting local communities to build capacity, advocate for and protect freshwater ecosystems, and advancing knowledge systems and collaborative action for freshwater conservation. Now, weaving through all of these strands, we're also focusing on key cross-cutting themes that are shared with many of our other programs. We're providing core flexible funding, like paying for salaries. We're seeking to build connections between local and international level work. And we're channeling much of our support directly to locally led organizations. Today, we're very excited and very lucky to have 3 of our freshwater partners join us from South Africa, Brazil, and Papua New Guinea to directly share equitable, practical, and impactful actions for the conservation of freshwater biodiversity and ecosystems. Yolani Amipu is the director at Piku Biodiversity Network. She works with communities along the Kikori River in Papua New Guinea to conserve and protect freshwater biodiversity. Her journey started back in 2013 when she became the first Papua New Guinean to work on the endangered pig-nosed turtle and started to work with 23 villages along the river to support community-led initiatives that deliver impactful conservation action along the river. Hugo Costa is the finance director and scientific research coordinator at Instituto Juruá in Brazil. He is a biologist and is currently a PhD candidate in ecology at the National Institute for Amazon Research. He's been working for the past 13 years in the Juruá River Basin, where he coordinates the development of cutting-edge research that supports effective and equitable management of natural resources by local communities. And then we have Sizi Wemota, who's the Africa Program Director at International Rivers. She's worked on environmental, social justice, and human rights issues in Africa, has supported communities impacted by extractive industries, and engaged policymakers in pursuit of energy justice. Holding a degree in social science, her goal is to champion environmental protection and human rights. Thank you all so very much for joining us today and for taking time out of your day to share a little bit with us about your work, about the challenges, your approaches, but also your ambitions. I'd like to start the conversation today by asking you, what do rivers mean to you, to your communities, or the communities that you work with? Hugo, would you want to start?
Yes, Felix, I can start. So thank you, Synchronicity team, for inviting us for this panel. So the Juruá River to me made me a remarkable change in my life and on my ideas. So all this time working the Juruá River makes me understand that nobody will better protect Amazonia than the people who live there. So the rivers for the communities mean the food you eat during the year. So in the Amazonia, we have the acai palm fruit season, which is during the high water season, and during the dry waters, the low water season, we have many different types of food. So the rivers drive the distance you travel, even the people you met. So the love of your life, you can meet more easily during one season than another. So we say that the river commands the life. So the river means everything to us and to people who live there.
Thank you, Hugo. I like how you've mentioned the river commands life. Yolani, how about you?
So to us, hi everybody. Rivers signify connectivity. I work along a river delta with over 10 tribes and 50 villages. This is 10 different language-speaking tribes and their own unique cultures. Different cultures shaped by the same river. The Kikori River begins in the mountains where two rivers of the highlands of Papua New Guinea connect, runs for 400 kilometers before draining tributaries into the Gulf of Papua, where it connects the sea. Connecting lands, people, river to sea, and biodiversity. No matter how diverse we are, what happens at the top of the river impacts the bottom. Any blockage in the middle of the river, a disconnection. Although difference and diversity exist, the river demonstrates connectivity and interdependence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yolani, for highlighting the how rivers connect life and connect people. Siziwe, I'd be really keen to hear what you have to say.
Thank you so much, Felix, and thanks for inviting me to this webinar. So in terms of, what rivers mean for me as an environmental justice and human rights advocate, beyond what, the recreation and the beauty of rivers, I've worked with communities, indigenous communities, local communities, living along the Kunene River, along the mighty Congo River. And, rivers have been a source of survival for many of these communities. And some of the reasons why the communities are depending on rivers is for many reasons. Cultural, spiritual practices are one of them, and they are quite central to the community's culture. They, for example, the Himba in Namibia have vast livestock, and the river provides water for them and for their livestock. It's a source of food supply for them, for their livelihoods, also for local economies, for jobs even, for job creation. So, at a community level, rivers are immensely important for communities. But in addition to that, they also play a critical role in supporting biodiversity and maintaining healthy and functioning ecosystems. They have an interesting climate change mitigation function as well, and act as a carbon sink. So there are many reasons and many various reasons why rivers are important to me, and they're important to the indigenous communities that I work with, and also important to international rivers more broadly as an organization.
Thank you very much, Siziwe. Yeah, you're right. Probably we could spend the entire discussion today talking about the importance of rivers to individuals and communities. Sadly, only have time to scratch at the surface of each of these. But then connecting to that and connecting to some of the stats that Ian highlighted before, in the region that you work in, what are some of the freshwater conservation challenges that you face or that your partners face? Do you want to go first, Yolani? Thanks.
Okay, I shall take that challenge. So I work in the Kikori River. It's not even Papua New Guinea's first largest river, it's the 5th. So for Papua New Guinea, most people don't even know the Kikori River exists, just for Papua New Guinea alone. The Kikori is very diverse, biodiverse. This is reflected in the cultural diversity found here. And then it is for these cultural and biological diversity values that it is currently sitting on the tentative list for UNESCO World Heritage Site. Its biodiversity has for a while been kept intact because of how isolated and how difficult it is to access where we are. We are now facing the threat of biodiversity loss as roads are built and bridges are built, and the world comes in for the biodiversity this area holds. One of the last places in the world for critically endangered sawfish, for the pignose turtle, which is the last extant species of a once globally widespread turtle family. And large fish so limited in global distribution, their swim bladder, an organ, is currently being bought in villages from local fishermen for 2,500 USD per 100 grams. This to feed an elite East Asian market. We face the threat of river damming. With a high rate of water discharge we have per second, damming the Kikori and the neighboring Kurari River will provide enough energy to electrify Queensland, which is one of Australia's largest states. But electrifying another country's largest state will disconnect the river and the river life as we know it.
Thanks for highlighting the challenges, Yolani. It seems like there's plenty, and looking forward to hearing a little bit about how you and your partners address some of these challenges. Sizwe, would you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Felix. I mean, obviously, some of the challenges that we're dealing with related to freshwater conservation is just the crisis that results from, decades and decades of human exploitation of rivers. And this includes, rivers being dammed for hydropower, whether it's water diversion, whether it's pollution, from mining activities or other industrial activities that are discharged into rivers and lakes, all posing serious problems for freshwater conservation. Of course, these are all driven and led by corporations and by banks, who are the ones who are funding, who are developing the industrial projects, who are developing the dams that are built and impeding the free flow of rivers, which is important to have an undisrupted natural flow of water and sediment, because that preserves the water quality. Fish is able to migrate easily, and the biodiversity and critical habitat of the natural species is protected. So it's important that rivers remain free-flowing and undisturbed and uninterrupted from their source to their mouth, without being hemmed in by dams and dikes or whatever the case may be. So yeah, I would say those are some of the challenges that we're facing in the region, and widely related to energy provision, and in some instances for export to other regions, mostly in the global north.
Thank you, Sizwe, for highlighting the challenges that you're facing, the freshwater conservation challenges faced in your work. It's be curious to hear how that compares to the Juruá, Hugo.
Yeah, here in the Juruá, as in the entire Amazon basin, we have the most difficult is to fight against the illegal activities. So illegal fishing, illegal resource exploitation, such as illegal mining, as you see in the journals right now, who are very widespread during the past government. And so land grabbers that grab land from indigenous people and other traditional communities that are in the Amazon for centuries. And also we have historical government support to commodity production and not environmental friendly development strategies such as dams and roads. So this goes against difficulties to fight a fair trade for environmental friendly products such as the arapaima and other social value chains from the Amazon, and also the top-down decision-making that are made. So local people are often neglected during the decision-making process, not included when designing all these government and development strategy programs.
Thanks, Hugo, for having the challenges in the Juruá and the wider Amazon biome. Maybe we can stay with you then and move on to the next question. seems like there's plenty of challenges, but what are some of the approaches that your organization has taken on to address these challenges, and why have you chosen those approaches?
So Instituto Juruá is working on the empowerment of local communities to protect their own territories and manage their own resources. So the tool we use this is called the fishing agreement. So during the dry season, when the waters recede, so the oxbow lakes turns into discrete elements on the landscape. So they're very easy to manage during this period of the year. So the fishing agreements, we specialize the lakes, and we basically, it's a conflict resolution tool, and we divide the lakes into 3 basic categories, which is one, the conservation lake, an open access lake for the commercial fishing, and another lake that is the subsistence lake for the local communities for our daily food. So this approach has bring us amazing results, many ecological benefits on recovering the population of very wild, historical overexploited species such as arapaima, tambaqui, river turtles, and many other species. And also, on the other hand, it brings also very promising social benefits. Even the gender equality in fisheries that are historically neglected. So the fishing record is being a very promising tool for conservation, and is a very easy reproducible tool that can be widespread throughout Amazonia and many other tropical places.
Thank you, Hugo. We can send some information in the follow-up, but I do recommend going at the website. I think also, Hugo, what you haven't mentioned is that you're a wonderful photographer, which is really, really helpful in communicating the work that you do. Yolani, what are some of the approaches that Piku Biodiversity Network has taken on, and why those approaches?
My organization, the Piku Biodiversity Network, it's taken on the challenge, like Hugo, of a bottom-up approach. This means we achieve biodiversity conservation action, freshwater ecosystem protection by beginning from community. One of the biggest reasons why we take this approach is because we're taking into consideration Papua New Guinea's land tenure system. Papua New Guinea is one of the few countries in the world where the majority of land, rivers, coastal waters are held in customary land tenure, where clan ownership of land is recognized by our country's constitution. I think being a new, young country, we're only 48 years old as a country, and we learned a lot from the lessons of the world. I hope we can continue learning. But to date, over 80% of the country's land is held in customary ownership, governed on ground by traditional systems of governance, some tens of thousands to hundreds of years older than our young country. For most activities, commercial or otherwise, free prior informed consent from local communities and approval from traditional landholders is required. It's necessary, it's mandated. Traditional management of land, water, coastal environment, and resources is still practiced in modern Papua New Guinea. Given this scenario, the bottom-up approach in PNG promises a higher chance of success. So an example of this is how we approach bottom-up management of our freshwater ecosystem, or an example of how we do this is how we are currently tackling the local decline of the freshwater pig-nosed turtle. So the pig-nosed turtle is a CITES species. We can't trade it outside of Papua New Guinea. But there's a little loophole that says we can traditionally eat it like how our ancestors ate it. And so there's been a 50% decline since the 1980s, mainly driven by the human consumption of this turtle along rivers like the Kikori. So we tackled this problem beginning from 2011 by engaging 23 villages, 10 schools, over 100 local primary school and high school students. And we got them to monitor the rate of harvest, the rate of consumption during the turtles nesting season along the river, small river. So students working in the local villages and markets collected alongside the villages data, created an awareness, and assisted the communities in recognizing what the issue was. Then communities and clans became active in working alongside us and partners to explore solutions that were practical to culture and the realities of the changing lifestyle. So these solutions included things like protecting major nesting sandbanks for the turtle during the turtle nesting season to allow them to reproduce. That's just one example. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yolani, for giving also that wonderful example of the work you've done with young students on the pig-nosed turtle. Sizwe, what are some of the approaches that International Rivers has taken on in the Africa program?
So we are working with Indigenous and local communities. With the Indigenous communities, we are working with them to develop biocultural community protocols, which are really tools for empowering communities to be able to assert their rights and to be able to participate in decisions that affect their lives. What the protocol does is it sets a set of guidelines, it sets principles that the community itself develops based on their culture, their practices, to ensure that anybody entering their territory, it gives them a guide on how to respect those things that they value, and it gives a guide to organizations and other external actors on how to do that. The other approach that we have is the rights of rivers approach, and it's derived from the rights of nature approach. And the approach itself aims to enshrine the river as a legal entity, which is sort of entitled to basic rights that can be enshrined through the courts. It can be through national legislation, international instruments, etc. And that is proven to be effective in many regions, particularly in South America. And it's something that we as an organization and as a program in the Africa region are pushing, particularly in the river basins that we're working in. Another way of, or another approach that we have is really partnering with communities, whether it's the Indigenous, whether it's traditional, or it's local communities who are impacted, provide platforms for them to be able to voice and resist and take on the struggles that they are facing.
Thanks, Sizwe, for giving a little bit of an insight into the approaches you're using, International Rivers is using around the world, but particularly in the African context. I know one restricting factor to a lot of this wonderful work is, like in many other fields, is often funding, insecurity of funding or lack of funding, especially long-term. So I guess another question would be, if you knew that you could raise all the funding that you needed, all the funding you wanted, what would you choose to prioritize in your work over the next 5 years to contribute to a flourishing future for freshwater? Sizwe, we can start with you if you want to.
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, the legal aspects, the rights of rivers, legal protections work, I think is critical in creating a legal framework that ensures that, rivers do not continue to be exploited and continue to be polluted and dammed. And it also allows communities to sort of take responsibility or ownership or act even as guardians of those particular rivers who've been given legal protection. The other element of that is, funds for advocating for dam removals. I think it's quite critical for the restoration of rivers. Where there are so many negative impacts on the biodiversity and where local communities and Indigenous communities are impacted. So it's the legal, it's issues around dam removals, but also just supporting communities, their own resistance, as much as we're supporting them, but, them being able to adequately, be trained, but also, have a platform, voices to be able to resist these types of projects. Yeah, and there's so much more, but I think those three would be the critical ones.
Yeah, thanks. It's I think throughout the conversation it becomes clearer and clearer of just how key the role of supporting Indigenous peoples and local communities and continuing to steward for rivers, lakes, and other wetlands is. If the global community hopes to stand a chance to reverse the freshwater biodiversity crisis and all its associated consequences. Yolani, in your case, and along the Kikorian and Papua New Guinea, what would you prioritize over the next 5 years if you could get all the funding you needed?
I love that dream, all the funding I need. I would prioritize creating opportunities of community engagement in freshwater biodiversity conservation. There's a lot of knowledge. It's almost common sense, or it is not almost, it is common sense that our freshwater environment is important. Getting that knowledge and putting it into action isn't as common sense and as we would like it to be. If I had that funding, I would create opportunities that include things like establishing a center that communities can gather, meet, have dialogue, share appreciation of the environment and of their cultures, create competitive job opportunities so people don't feel like they have to choose between their livelihoods in today's day and age and the natural environment. Again, create opportunities for people to take action with the knowledge they have, the knowledge they gain, to lead protection and conservation of what is theirs, and along the way, protect some of the world's last remaining species that contribute, or one of our last, the world's last remaining species that contribute to the world's freshwater biodiversity and its values. Currently, securing long-term core flexible funding is a big challenge for us. This results in high staff turnover, us being unable to offer proper employment, or even attractive employment benefits and basic needs like insurance. And this threatens the sustainability of our programs and our activities. Solving the issue of funding required to operate will go a long way in ensuring freshwater biodiversity conservation action that is sustainable, not just action, but action that's sustainable, where we can act locally and also in the same way achieve global targets. Thank you.
Thanks, Izzy. Yeah, it's I like your dream a lot, and I hope we can get there together. But especially at the end, you mentioned this part of sustainable local action to achieve global targets, and I think that is such an important point to highlight that I think often in global discussions can be overlooked quite quickly, is that really localized action with global relevance is what will drive us to achieving global targets. Hugo, in the Juroa, what would you like to prioritize over the next 5 years with all the funding you needed?
A good question. We would say that there's a big wave of bioeconomy in the Amazon. So there are many discussions in the government or in the private sector about bioeconomy in the Amazon, such as the carbon market and for many other non-timber forest products. But in all these agenda, it is not clearly defined what is the role and the benefit distribution to local communities within this agenda. So if you have to prioritize our activities, we would like to guarantee that this bioeconomy concept to be developed in the Amazon must be environmental, sustainable, scientific supported, and with social justice. So this is what we would prioritize.
Thanks a lot, Hugo. And Yolani and Siziwe for taking the time to answer these questions and to give us a little bit of a peek into the work that you're engaged in and the work that you're leading. We're all very, very lucky that we get to work together with you on this, and feel very lucky to be your partners. We have a little bit of time to answer a few questions. So if people in the audience, if you want to add anything to the Q&A box, please feel free to do so. And then we can get to them. There's already one question that I feel like maybe I'll direct that question to you, Siziwe. The question is, there's over 300 international rivers that are shared by one or more countries, which are facing varying extents of socio-ecological challenges. A lot of the ones that all of you mentioned, so biodiversity loss, displacement of local communities, among others. What are the current unified initiatives at the local, national, and international levels facilitated or championed by your network that hope to be translated into policy action? Would you be able to give that a go?
Yeah, give me a second. I'm just reading it.
Yeah, it's always easiest to read it as well.
I can share an example while you read it. Can it be?
Yeah, perfect. Please go ahead.
So in Amazonia, we work with the Arapaima management. So the Arapaima is the largest scaled fish of freshwater. So we have the Arapaima management in many river basins in the Amazon. So what we did is to create a collective brand for Arapaima. So there's no Arapaimas in the market from the Juruá, from the Purus, or from the Japurá River, for example. All management units were unified in a collective brand. So there is just one brand, collective brand for all Arapaima market in the Amazon. So this joint association, many local associations were joined on this unified market. So this strengthened our program and the brand and help us to achieve many different markets within Brazil. And now we're starting an export program for the Amazon. So this collective brand help us to empower more the communities and guarantee a fair trade for the local communities.
Thanks, Hugo. That's really a really exciting, big initiative. Siziwe, would you want to share your perspective as well?
Yes, absolutely. So within the
Thanks.
Africa region, as an example, we are forming a network of sort of river defenders. We also have a project called Women in Rivers, where women come together and they share and find strategies and are, through training, are able to support each other on various ways of resisting, on various strategies for supporting each other to challenge dam and infrastructure and other infrastructure development. We're doing the same within the region, focusing on women, but also just more broadly developing a regional network of NGOs and also of communities who are able to take on and support each other in fighting these developments.
Thank you very much for responding to that. I hope that answers the question. We were trying. I think we have time for maybe 1 to 2 more questions. I'll go to one here. And that was sent in the chat. All of the provider priority needs discussed focus on social and conservation methods. Do you see any priority, quote unquote, research needs? Who would like to try and give that a go? I know we also have Ian in the audience if you feel like you'd like to answer that one.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I can't. Oh, here we go. Just on my video. Okay. Here we go. Yeah, thanks, Michael, for that. That's a great question. And actually, I would flip it right back at you as someone who I think is doing research that actually is important. Looking, for example, at inland fisheries. I think there's the kinds of work that you're doing, looking at how we can understand better the state of inland fisheries, the state of fish populations in communities, and how to sustainably manage those fisheries in support of the communities that rely on them is supremely important, particularly looking at how that's changing in relation to climate changes, how that's changing where the species are, what they're doing, where they're feeding on, this kind of thing. I think on a broader level, I mean, there's related to one of the questions that came in the Q&A about how we're working on international policy. I mean, something that we're a key part of that work is getting a better understanding of how to do, where to do protection and how to do protection, and where it's most important, where we can have the most effect. What are the ecosystems that are overlooked, the riparian ecosystems, the wetland ecosystems that are overlooked, and how our actions and management can be most effective, and actually building up a strong set of conservation evidence for what's worked well through the combination of research to application is going to be is really important. It's very common, I think, for research to be done and then stated as that this is supplied sort of important information, but actually how it's applied and used is never really clearly stated. And so that application of existing research is supremely important, and particularly for things like where we can do restoration, where we can do protection, what are the characteristics of ecosystems which make them restorable. And again, particularly how that action can work in relation to how these ecosystems are changing with climate change and so on. So I think it's a great question.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks for that very insightful answer. Would someone else within the panel like to respond to that as well? Yolani, I see you raised your hand.
When I saw that question, I was thinking, where do you even start to answer that question? So the Piku Biodiversity Network became the Piku Biodiversity Network from a foundation of biological research. So from research, we discovered there was a problem, and then realized this research needs to be applied as soon as possible or you lose a species. And I've been seeing that just replicate. So with research needs, it's almost like choose your poison. There's so much research that needs to happen. What Hugo said, scientifically sound data that we can use to inform actual decisions. So the Kikori River Delta, where we are, is an important. It was designated in 2020 an important marine mammal area, so an IMMA. Right now, there's dialogue, there's debate on whether we should designate it an important shark and ray area. So these are areas of global significance. To local people, they're paper parks. And so it goes back to what Ian was talking about. We need research on how to put research into application. We have this data. There's a lot of gaps. There's a lot of loopholes that need to happen. Right now, or since 2018, my head has been wrapped up in sharks and rays. I'm a turtle person. I'm not enjoying sharks and rays. But my head has been wrapped up in sharks and rays, dealing with 43 species of sharks and rays just in the tiny little area that we have. Most of or 29 of the species of sharks and rays that we're working with on IUCN's red list. One of them is data deficient. We have no idea what's going on with this species. We know it's there. You got 43 species. We're looking at how to conserve them. 6 of them are listed as critically endangered. We don't know what to do with them. And right now there's only us, one tiny NGO that we're biologists, we've got our biologist hats on, but applying or even getting that knowledge, the biology knowledge we need in order to apply or to provide applications that work. So every time I'm sitting in a meeting discussing national policy, we're thinking, we're asking, is this going to work? Because we don't want to spend funding on something that I know is not going to work, but I need the science, the data to put on the table so that when we're making these decisions, it's not thinking about opinions, talking about what I think, but what is scientifically sound, so the people making the decisions can be comfortable with the decisions that they make. Too much research needs, so much, it's uncountable. It's how do we get people here? How do we get that funded? That's a whole big broad topic and a challenge in itself, but a really good question.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I see there are so many wonderful questions, and we sadly won't have time to go through all of them, but what we could try and do is just collect them, we have them all, and then send in a follow-up email together with the recording and so on. We might be able to send a few shorter responses to all of those wonderful questions, because they're all really interesting and touching on so many different aspects. But I did see, Hugo, that you had your hand raised and wanted to give a response to this as well. So I'll hand over to you as well to complement what people have said.
Yes, because we have a very good example from the arapaima management. So the arapaima was overexploited for centuries and was disappearing from the Amazon basin. So researchers started to study its population to try to understand the status of it. So during the early 90s, so a researcher was guessing how to estimate the population of arapaima. So he was doing the capture remarking process, you know, so passing the nets through the lakes and capture and marking and release and mark again. So it's a huge work to do this with a 200 kilograms fish. So one fisherman that was helping him just thought, oh, Leandro, we don't need to do all this work. I know how to count arapaima. So they come to the surface to breathe. So come here, I can teach you how to count arapaima. And so look, and he teaches the researcher how to count arapaima, and then he passed the net, and wow, the count was really precise. So this started, and this population counting supports now the arapaima managed throughout all the Amazon basin. So there are many research gaps that can give support to the management and the benefits in both ecological and social benefits for the resource managed by local communities. So the population monitoring and how can it be extended to other species. For the terrestrial species, we have a lot of research gaps on how to do it. So this is a good example on how, if we listen to local communities, to listen to local knowledge, we can go far away on our research as well.
Thank you, Hugo, for that addition as well, and thanks for all the wonderful questions and really insightful answers. It's always towards the end, always feels like there's never enough time to go to everything. So we'll try and go to all of the questions in the follow-up email afterwards, that everyone will get that registered. Just before wrapping up, we'd also like to use this opportunity to share a call for action by Indigenous peoples and local communities from around the world, asking all of society to mobilize for the protection of the world's rivers, lakes, and wetlands. This call for action was put together in partnership with Shoal and the Nature Conservancy and a whole range of other organizations in December last year for COP15 of the Convention on Biological Diversity that led to the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. However, the message within that they call the call for action message back then is as relevant today. So we're very lucky that we get to share this call for action with all of you today.
Somos povos tradicionais do Rio Tocantins no Brasil.
สวัสดีครับชื่อธีรพงษ์โพมั่นนะครับอยู่ประเทศไทยที่เห็นข้างหลังคือแม่น้ำโขง
My name is Brian Holmes. I'm from the Upper Nicola Band, Silk Territory.
Onde serize ropuxa na titere no Ihai Pantanal Brasil.
Angélique Mpoezolo ya RDC. Naza na rivière obabenga ngovuze eza annexe na Fleuve Congo.
Soy Valeria Paso, vivo en el paraje Chipauquil, que está ubicado al pie de meseta de Somoncura, Patagonia, Argentina.
My name is Adnan Juliman, and I'm currently standing next to the largest car spring in Europe. And this river is located in Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Meu nome é Maria Cunha, eu moro no Rio Giruá, na Amazônia Brasileira, na região do Médio Giruá.
I have found memories related to this beautiful river. Today, unfortunately, our river is not the same as it was 30 years ago. It is victim of increasing pollution from waste waters that end up in the river itself. The plant and animal life in Buna River is more and more endangered every day.
Fleuve Congo yango epesaka biso mai toarozaka na babilanga na biso, yango epesaka biso mbisi oyo toliaka totangiselaka mpe bana. Mais depuis présence yango tosokolaka yango tolambelaka depuis présence ya barrage to remarqué to peut-être bespèce ebele parce que mai ezokoma lisusu na pona yango te basable ekomi ebele na mabele barrage ememeli biso badifficulté na yango ezosenga fo tobatela ba richesse oyo bakoko na biso batikela biso fo toprotege yango mpe environnement.
Quando makakoipiha pochikoya na ovichi nyowo ke yana gobierno no mikusha quando makara ukoko yar singu kochene pihachine esa iko koekora meu ena makmowo ichi yar shene en iwo hike howe en pon ha apena hiko kono ko ichi piha hiko pone
Coğrafya özel ikilimi flora faunası bakımından bölgenin kritik vadilerinden biridir. Yarım asırdır kayıp olan Batman çöpçü balığı da varlığını burada sürdürüyor. Ve sarımçay yüzden fazla köye hayat veriyor.
Moramos aqui há várias gerações, pescando para alimentar nossas famílias. Esse pedral é um refúgio e o maior berçário de peixes na área, com peixes ameaçados de extinção. Mas o governo quer explodir nosso pedral do Lourenção por mais de 2 anos para exportar soja e minério, recusando estudar os peixes que moram no fundo do rio até 80 metros, afetando mais de 200 quilômetros de culturas.
Over the time, our people have fished in this lake, the sustenance fisheries of burbot and kokanee. We've seen changes to the water in terms of algae blooms becoming more toxic more often. The water temperatures are getting more extreme.
Y tenemos especies únicas en el mundo, como la mojarra y la rana. Las amenazas que la especie que existe en el arroyo son los peces exóticos que no son del lugar.
แม่น้ำโขงมีความสำคัญต่อประชาชนกว่า60 ล้านคนโดยเฉพาะเป็นแหล่งอาหารที่สำคัญของชาวบ้านริมฝั่งแม่น้ำโขงนะครับแม่น้ำโขงมีปลากว่า 1,200 ชนิดจึงเป็นแม่น้ำที่อุดมสมบูรณ์นะครับมีปลาหายากที่ใกล้สูญพันธุ์เช่นปลาบึกปลากระเบนปลาเอิญปลาเลิมและปลาอื่นอีกมากมายนะครับมีปลาโลมาแม่น้ำโขงด้วยนะครับที่ใกล้สูญพันธุ์แล้วนะครับ
Nós fazemos um trabalho de conservação comunitária do pirarucu e das tartarugas, que são animais que foram muito capturados para venda e por isso foram quase extintos. Ao longo da minha vida, eu presenciei o número de peixes aumentar nos lagos. E hoje em dia, a pesca regulada do pirarucu gera renda para as famílias daqui. Trabalho de conservação comunitária como esse precisam de mais financiamento. Precisamos da Amazônia de pé, com rios limpos e pessoas felizes. Por isso, pedimos a vocês, protejam a água doce.
Protéger environnement na biso. Parce que toza na mbongo te tokokoka ko protéger environnement na biso.
สร้างผลกระทบในหลายด้านจึงจำเป็นที่ต้องมีการให้การสนับสนุนแก้ไขปัญหารวมทั้งป้องกันปัญหาที่จะเกิดขึ้นในอนาคตด้วย
We need to protect these fresh waters.
Pedimos a vocês que protejam os rios do mundo.
Proteja nuestras aguas.
Please protect inland waters.
Pedimos a vocês, protejam os rios do mundo.
Thank you very much. Well, that brings us to the end of today's webinar. I hope today's discussions gave you a taste of the work that Synchronicity Earth's freshwater program supports, a taste of the work of some of our wonderful freshwater program partners. We're currently working on growing the program and are in the process of increasing our support to the program's existing partners while also extending support to new partners with a focus on solutions that are led by Indigenous peoples and local communities. None of this would be possible without our wonderful existing freshwater pooled fund donors. And thanks to you, we're able to actually start meaningfully growing the program's impact. If, however, you're not already engaged, but would be interested in learning more about the program, its partners, and the Freshwater Pooled Fund, please do feel free to reach out. If you'd like to learn more about the work of our wonderful speakers today, you can also reach out directly to them. We'll include their emails in the following email. And we're also always very keen to hear your feedback. So if you have any time, please do click the link that was shared in the chat box and let us know what you made of the event, the good and the bad, so that we can continue improving our work. I want to thank all of you for joining today. Thank you so much to our amazing speakers. Thank you to our wonderful partners, collaborators, and funders from all around the world, and everybody in the audience that took time out of their day to join us today. It's great to see freshwater ecosystems slowly but surely gaining recognition and funding, and we're excited to continue working within a collaborative ecosystem of freshwater champions to secure a thriving future for freshwater ecosystem and thereby for all life on Earth. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day, or good night in case of Yolani and anybody joining us from further east.